The first time 7-year-old Sarah Thompson saw the injured Bobcat kitten struggling through the snow outside their remote Minnesota cabin, she couldn't have known that this moment would forge a bond that would one day save both their lives in ways that defied every conventional understanding of the relationship between human and wild animal. The tiny creature, no bigger than her grandfather's work gloves, had been separated from its mother during a brutal February blizzard that had swept through the northern wilderness, with a ferocity that reminded Jack Thompson why he'd chosen this isolated life after losing his daughter and son-in-law in a car accident 3 years earlier. In that crystalline moment between discovery and decision, as Sarah knelt in the deep snow with her mittened hands extended toward the frightened kitten, neither she nor her grandfather could foresee that their act of compassion would create a protector whose fierce loyalty would prove stronger than the greed of men who valued mineral rights over human lives, and whose wild instincts would orchestrate a defense that would transform their quiet sanctuary into a battleground where courage, cunning, and the unbreakable bonds between kindred spirits would determine who survived, and who would face the consequences of underestimating the power of love that transcended species. If you enjoy the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. Jack Thompson had been living in the hand-built log cabin deep in the Superior National Forest for nearly 4 years since his retirement from geological surveying, creating a self-sufficient life that honored both his need for solitude and his responsibility for raising Sarah after the tragedy that had made him her sole guardian. At 68, Jack had thought his days of discovery were behind him, but Sarah's arrival had reminded him that life still held wonders worth protecting, and the vast wilderness surrounding their home had become both classroom and playground for a remarkable little girl who seemed as comfortable tracking deer through the underbrush as she was solving arithmetic problems at their kitchen table. The cabin sat on 40 acres of pristine forest land that Jack had purchased decades earlier with the inheritance from his geological surveys, land that held secrets he'd kept buried in filing cabinets and survey documents that he'd never imagined would one day make his granddaughter a target for men whose greed knew no boundaries. The March morning that changed everything began like hundreds of others, with Sarah bundling into her snow gear to check the rabbit snares they'd set along the creek, while Jack prepared their breakfast of venison sausage and eggs from their small flock of chickens. But when Sarah's excited shouts echoed through the pine trees, Jack knew immediately that she'd found something more significant than their usual harvest of snowshoe rabbits or the occasional grouse that supplemented their largely self-sufficient diet. "Grandpa Jack, come quick. There's a baby something hurt by the big oak." Jack found Sarah kneeling beside what appeared to be a lifeless bundle of tawny fur, but as he approached with the caution that 40 years in the wilderness had taught him, he could see the shallow rise and fall of breathing that indicated the creature was clinging to life, despite obvious injuries and severe hypothermia. The Bobcat kitten, probably no more than 8 weeks old, had suffered what appeared to be a leg injury and showed signs of starvation that suggested it had been separated from its mother for several days. "She's so cold, Grandpa," Sarah whispered, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air as she instinctively reached toward the injured animal. "Can we help her like we helped the owl with the broken wing?" Jack's first instinct was to explain the dangers of handling wild predators, even young ones, but something in Sarah's expression, a combination of compassion and determination that reminded him powerfully of her grandmother, made him reconsider his automatic response. The kitten was clearly dying, and leaving it to suffer violated both his moral code and the lessons he was trying to teach Sarah about their responsibility as stewards of the wilderness that had become their home. "Very carefully," Jack said, removing his heavy work gloves and handing them to Sarah. "Wild animals are different from pets, even when they're babies. But you're right, we can't leave her to die when we have the ability to help." The process of rescuing the kitten required all of Jack's wilderness first aid knowledge and Sarah's remarkable intuition for animal behavior. They created a makeshift stretcher from Jack's hunting jacket, transported the nearly frozen animal to their cabin, and spent the next 72 hours providing round-the-clock care that included warming bottles, hand feeding, and the kind of patient nurturing that Sarah seemed to understand instinctively. "I think we should call her Luna," Sarah announced on the third day, when the kitten had finally opened her eyes and begun responding to their voices. "Because her eyes look like the moon when it's really bright through the trees." Luna's recovery was remarkable, aided by Sarah's dedicated care and Jack's practical knowledge of treating injured wildlife. Within 2 weeks, the young bobcat was mobile enough to explore their one-room cabin, though she remained small enough to curl up in Sarah's lap during the evening hours when Jack read aloud from their collection of nature guides and adventure stories. Most remarkably, Luna showed no fear of humans and seemed to recognize Sarah as both caretaker and companion, following the little girl around their property with the devotion of a domestic pet, combined with the alert awareness of a wild predator. "She's imprinting on you," Jack explained as they watched Luna stalking through the snow behind Sarah, mimicking her movements with uncanny precision. In the wild, she'd be learning hunting and survival skills from her mother. Instead, she's learning from you, which means she'll always consider you part of her family. As spring arrived and Luna grew rapidly toward her adult size, Jack faced the difficult decision of whether to attempt releasing her back into the wild, or accepting that their rescue had created a permanent bond that defied conventional wisdom about human-wildlife relationships. Luna showed clear signs of wild instincts. She hunted successfully on her own, maintained the cautious alertness that kept wild animals alive, and displayed none of the dependency behaviors that would have made survival impossible. But her attachment to Sarah was equally undeniable. Luna slept outside their cabin door every night, accompanied Sarah on her daily explorations of their property, and showed protective behaviors that suggested she'd assumed responsibility for the little girl's safety in ways that went far beyond normal animal bonding. "She's chosen us," Sarah said with the simple clarity that children brought to complex situations. "And we chose her. Isn't that what family means?" Jack's geological background had taught him to recognize valuable mineral deposits, and the surveys he'd conducted on their property years earlier had revealed significant copper and rare earth mineral veins that he'd documented, but never reported to mining companies. The information remained filed away in his personal records, forgotten until the day he noticed unfamiliar vehicles parked along the access road that led to their isolated homestead. The first approach came in late summer, when a well-dressed man claiming to represent a mining consortium appeared at their door with offers to purchase their land for what he described as recreational development. Jack's polite refusal seemed to end the matter, but Sarah noticed that Luna became increasingly agitated during and after these visits, displaying protective behaviors that suggested her wild instincts detected threats that humans might miss. "Something's not right about those men," Sarah confided to Luna during one of their evening conversations, a habit she developed that Jack found both touching and remarkably effective for processing her thoughts and feelings. "You feel it too, don't you?" Luna's response was to position herself between Sarah and the direction from which the strangers had approached, a defensive posture that she maintained for days after each unwelcome visit. Jack, recognizing the validity of both Sarah's intuition and Luna's instincts, began taking precautions that included securing his geological survey documents and teaching Sarah enhanced wilderness survival skills that he hoped she'd never need to use. If you enjoy the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. The conspiracy that would eventually threaten their peaceful existence began forming in the offices of Northland Mining Corporation, where Jack's nephew Derek Thompson had been researching his uncle's property holdings with the help of his business partner Marcus Webb and a corrupt child welfare officer named Patricia Hayes. Derek had always resented Jack's inheritance of the family land, and his financial desperation following a series of failed business ventures had transformed that resentment into a scheme that violated both family loyalty and legal boundaries. The old man sitting on a fortune and doesn't even know it, Derek explained to his co-conspirators during a meeting in a Minneapolis hotel room. My research shows copper deposits worth millions, plus rare earth minerals that could make us all rich. But he's stubborn, and that kid makes him even more protective of the property. Marcus Webb, whose background in mineral extraction had been terminated by previous employers due to questionable practices, saw an opportunity that appealed to both his greed and his willingness to use intimidation to achieve business objectives. If he won't sell voluntarily, we need leverage. Elderly man living alone with a child in an isolated location. There are ways to create pressure that most people can't resist. Patricia Hayes brought the missing piece to their scheme. Her position with Child Protective Services provided access to legal mechanisms for removing Sarah from Jack's custody, creating the desperation that would force him to sell the land to pay for legal representation and alternative living arrangements. Her own financial difficulties and decades of resentment toward families she considered more fortunate than herself had corrupted her professional ethics beyond repair. I can initiate an investigation based on anonymous reports of neglect, Hayes explained with clinical detachment. Isolated living conditions, inadequate educational resources, potential safety hazards. I can build a case that will give us custody leverage while you pressure him from the mining angle. The plan they developed relied on Jack's love for Sarah and his willingness to sacrifice anything to protect her welfare. They would create simultaneous pressure through child welfare threats and escalating offers for the land, building toward a crisis that would force Jack to choose between his granddaughter's future and his attachment to the wilderness property that had become their sanctuary. What none of the conspirators anticipated was Luna's presence as a factor in their calculations, or the extent to which Sarah's wilderness education had prepared her for dangers that went beyond natural predators and harsh weather conditions. The attack came on a cold October evening, when Jack and Sarah were settling into their comfortable routine of dinner preparation and evening reading. Luna, who had been restless throughout the day, suddenly positioned herself at the cabin door with her ears flat and her body tensed in the aggressive posture that indicated immediate danger approaching through the surrounding forest. "Someone's coming," Sarah whispered, recognizing Luna's warning signals with the same intuitive understanding that had guided their relationship from the beginning. "Bad people," Luna thinks. Jack immediately extinguished their oil lamps and moved to the window, where he could see three figures approaching through the trees with flashlights and what appeared to be weapons. His heart rate accelerated as he recognized the coordinated movement that suggested these weren't lost hunters or casual trespassers, but individuals with specific intentions that boded ill for both Sarah and himself. "Sarah, get to the crawl space," Jack commanded, referring to the emergency hiding place he'd constructed beneath their cabin floor. "Take Luna if she'll go, but don't make any sound no matter what happens up here." Sarah's wilderness training took over as she moved silently to the concealed entrance that Jack had camouflaged among the floorboards, but Luna refused to accompany her into hiding. Instead, the Bobcat positioned herself between Sarah's hiding place and the cabin door, her golden eyes reflecting the dim light as she prepared to defend her human family against whatever threat was approaching through the darkness. The men who kicked in their door were not the polished representatives who had made previous offers for Jack's land. Derek Thompson led two hired thugs whose backgrounds in collection enforcement and intimidation had prepared them for violence, but not for resistance from sources they hadn't anticipated. Their plan was simple: locate Jack's geological survey documents, convince him through physical persuasion to sign land transfer agreements, and disappear into the night with legal ownership of property worth millions. "Where are the mineral surveys, Uncle Jack?" Derek demanded, his voice carrying none of the family affection that had characterized their childhood relationships. "We know you documented copper and rare earth deposits on this land. Hand over the files and sign the transfer papers, and nobody gets hurt." Jack's refusal was immediate and uncompromising. "You're not getting this land, Derek. This is Sarah's inheritance, and I won't let you destroy her future for your greed." The violence that followed was swift and brutal. Marcus Webb struck Jack across the head with a pistol barrel, sending the older man to the floor with a head injury that left him dazed and bleeding. Patricia Hayes, who had remained outside to watch for any approaching vehicles, missed the dramatic turn that their carefully planned intimidation was about to take. From her hiding place beneath the floorboards, Sarah watched through a gap in the wood as the intruders ransacked their cabin, overturning furniture and rifling through Jack's files with increasing desperation. Her grandfather lay motionless near the overturned kitchen table, and Sarah felt terror unlike anything her wilderness education had prepared her to handle. But Luna was preparing a response that none of the intruders had considered in their planning. The first indication Derek and his companions had that their situation had changed came as a low growling sound that seemed to emanate from multiple directions simultaneously. Luna had disappeared from the cabin during the initial confusion, and her absence had been noted but not considered significant by men whose urban backgrounds had left them unprepared for the realities of wilderness predators. Luna's attack began with the tactical precision that millions of years of evolution had programmed into bobcat hunting behavior. She entered through a partially open window with silent grace, positioning herself behind the intruders before launching an assault that combined surprise, speed, and the kind of focused aggression that wild predators reserved for defending their territories and families. Derek Thompson's scream echoed through the forest as Luna's claws raked across his back, sending him stumbling into Marcus Webb and creating the confusion that Sarah needed to emerge from her hiding place and reach her grandfather's hunting rifle. The 7-year-old's hands shook as she lifted the weapon that Jack had taught her to use for hunting small game, but her determination was steady as she pointed it toward the men who had hurt her grandfather and threatened their home. "Get away from him," Sarah commanded, her young voice carrying an authority that surprised even her. "Luna, protect Grandpa Jack." The bobcat's response was immediate and terrifying. Luna positioned herself between Jack's unconscious form and the intruders, her golden eyes reflecting the flashlight beams as she issued vocalizations that carried clearly through the surrounding forest. Most remarkably, those calls were answered by other bobcats whose territories bordered their property, creating a chorus of wild voices that suggested Sarah and Luna were not defending their home alone. Marcus Webb, bleeding from claw wounds on his arms and face, made the mistake of moving toward Sarah with intentions of disarming her. Luna's second attack was even more ferocious than her first, driving the man backward through their broken door and into the darkness where other shapes moved through the trees with the fluid grace of predators converging on intruders who had violated their territory. "The kid's got a gun and there's wildcats everywhere," Webb shouted to Derek, who was trying to stanch the bleeding from his back wounds while maintaining his grip on the pistol that had become useless in the chaos of Luna's assault. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. Sarah held her position with the rifle trained on Derek, her wilderness training overriding her fear as she maintained the defensive stance that Jack had taught her during their hunting lessons. But it was Luna who controlled the situation, moving between the intruders and her human family with lethal grace, while her calls continued to summon other bobcats from the surrounding forest. The sound of approaching vehicles broke through the nighttime chaos, and Sarah felt overwhelming relief as she recognized the distinctive engine noise of Sheriff Morrison's patrol truck. Jack had called the sheriff earlier that evening to report suspicious activity around their property, and Morrison's decision to check on their welfare had arrived at the crucial moment when Sarah's courage and Luna's fierce protection needed official support to complete their defense. If you enjoy the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. Sheriff Tom Morrison had been patrolling the back roads of northern Minnesota for over 20 years, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for the scene he discovered at the Thompson cabin. 3 men, 2 of them bleeding from what appeared to be animal attacks, were being held at bay by a 7-year-old girl with a hunting rifle and a fully grown bobcat whose protective posture suggested she would kill anyone who threatened the child or the injured man lying near the overturned kitchen table. "Sarah, honey, it's Sheriff Morrison," he called through the broken door. "Are you and your grandfather okay?" "Grandpa Jack is hurt, but Luna protected us," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "These bad men broke into our house and hurt him, but Luna called her family and they came to help us." Morrison's assessment of the situation was both professional and personal. He'd known Jack Thompson for years and had watched Sarah grow from a traumatized 3-year-old into a confident, capable child whose wilderness education had clearly prepared her for challenges that most adults couldn't handle. The evidence of home invasion was obvious, but the presence of multiple bobcats defending the property suggested a level of human-wildlife cooperation that defied conventional understanding. Derek Thompson's attempt to claim victim status collapsed immediately when Morrison recognized him from previous encounters involving financial fraud and harassment complaints. The geological survey documents scattered across the cabin floor told a story of greed and conspiracy that explained the attack, while Patricia Hayes's panicked flight from the scene when law enforcement arrived confirmed her involvement in the scheme. "Looks like your plan didn't account for wildcats," Morrison observed as he handcuffed Derek and Marcus Webb, "or for raising a little girl who's tougher than most grown men." Jack's head injury required immediate medical attention, but his first concern upon regaining consciousness was for Sarah's well-being and Luna's safety. The bobcat had been injured during the attack, suffering wounds from Derek's knife that threatened her survival despite her successful defense of her human family. "Luna saved us, Grandpa," Sarah explained as paramedics worked to stabilize Jack for transport to the hospital. "She called all her friends and they scared the bad men away, but she's hurt, and I don't know how to help her." The next 24 hours tested the bonds that had formed among Jack, Sarah, and Luna in ways that none of them could have anticipated. Jack's hospitalization left Sarah in temporary foster care despite her protests, while Luna's injuries required veterinary treatment that pushed the boundaries of what was legally permissible for treating wild animals. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the veterinarian who agreed to treat Luna, recognized that this was not a typical wildlife case. "This animal has clearly bonded with your family in ways that go beyond normal human-wildlife relationships," she explained to Jack during his brief release from the hospital to sign treatment authorization forms. "Her injuries are serious, but her will to survive seems connected to her need to return to Sarah." The conspiracy trial that followed revealed the full extent of Derek Thompson's scheme and the corruption that had enabled it. Patricia Hayes's abuse of her position with Child Protective Services, Marcus Webb's history of violence and intimidation, and Derek's betrayal of family trust created a legal case that satisfied Jack's need for justice, while providing Sarah with the security of knowing that the threats to their home had been eliminated. But the most remarkable aspect of their ordeal was Luna's recovery and the deepening of her relationship with both Jack and Sarah. The bobcat's injuries healed slowly, aided by veterinary care and Sarah's devoted nursing that included reading aloud during Luna's convalescence and providing the kind of patient companionship that seemed to accelerate the healing process. "She knows we're family," Sarah explained to visitors who marveled at Luna's gentle behavior toward humans while maintaining her wild alertness toward potential threats. "We saved her when she was little, and she saved us when we needed help. That's what families do." The aftermath of the attack brought changes to their wilderness routine, but it also confirmed the strength of the bonds they'd built together. Jack's geological survey documents were destroyed during the attack, but he used his memory to establish conservation easements that would protect their land from future mining threats, while ensuring that Sarah's inheritance would include both financial security and the wilderness sanctuary that had shaped her childhood. Luna's recovery was complete by the following spring, but her relationship with Jack and Sarah had evolved beyond the original rescue dynamic into something that resembled a true partnership. She maintained her wild independence, hunting successfully and interacting with other bobcats in the surrounding territory, but she also returned to the cabin each evening to share in their family routine of dinner preparation and storytelling. Most remarkably, Luna's protective instincts had expanded to include not just Sarah and Jack, but their entire property and the wildlife that shared their forest ecosystem. She became an unofficial guardian of their wilderness sanctuary, discouraging poachers and trespassers while maintaining the delicate balance between human habitation and wild animal territory that made their coexistence possible. If you enjoy the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. Years later, when Sarah had grown into a confident teenager whose wilderness skills and scientific curiosity had earned her early acceptance to wildlife biology programs, she would look back on the night of the attack as the moment when her understanding of courage, family, and the connection between human and wild animal communities had crystallized into wisdom that would guide her throughout her life. Luna, now a fully mature bobcat with her own territory and occasionally her own cubs to protect, remained a daily presence in their lives, creating an extended family dynamic that included both domestic routine and wild freedom. The other bobcats who had responded to Luna's calls during the attack had established territories that bordered the Thompson property, creating a network of wild predators whose presence discouraged unwelcome human visitors, while providing Sarah with opportunities to observe and document bobcat behavior that contributed to her growing expertise in wildlife biology. Jack's head injury had healed completely, but the experience had taught him profound lessons about the courage and resourcefulness that Sarah had developed during their years of wilderness living. His granddaughter's ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, to use her training effectively in a life-threatening situation, and to maintain her compassionate connection with Luna, despite the violence they'd all endured, had confirmed his belief that their isolated lifestyle had given her advantages that no conventional education could provide. "You're going to be an extraordinary scientist," Jack told Sarah on one of their evening walks through the forest, watching Luna move through the trees with the fluid grace that marked all her activities. "But more importantly, you're going to be someone who understands that the boundaries between human and wild communities don't have to be barriers if they are built on respect and mutual protection." The conservation easements Jack had established ensured that their 40 acres would remain wild habitat in perpetuity, creating a legacy that would protect both the mineral resources that had made them targets and the ecosystem that had become their sanctuary. Sarah's inheritance would include financial security, but more importantly, it would include the knowledge and experience necessary to continue the work of building bridges between human needs and wildlife conservation. Luna's presence in their daily routine served as a constant reminder that the most profound relationships often developed between beings who chose to trust each other despite natural barriers and conventional wisdom that suggested such connections were impossible. Her fierce protection during the attack had validated Jack's decision to rescue her as a kitten, but more significantly, it had demonstrated the kind of loyalty and courage that transcended species boundaries and created families based on love rather than genetics. The geological surveys that had made their land valuable to mining interests had been replaced by biological surveys, documenting the remarkable biodiversity that flourished under Sarah's careful observation and Jack's protective stewardship. Their property had become an unofficial research station, where Sarah conducted the kind of long-term wildlife studies that would eventually contribute to her professional reputation as a scientist who understood both the technical aspects of animal behavior and the emotional intelligence that made interspecies communication possible. Most evenings found the three of them, Jack, Sarah, and Luna, sharing the peaceful routine that had become their definition of family happiness. Jack would prepare dinner while Sarah completed her correspondence course assignments, and Luna would position herself where she could observe both her human companions and monitor the surrounding forest for any signs of threat or disturbance. When darkness fell, and they gathered around their restored kitchen table for the evening meal that honored both human traditions and wild animal presence, the conversation often turned to plans for Sarah's future education and career goals, but it always returned to gratitude for the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together and taught them that family could be defined by choice, loyalty, and mutual protection, rather than conventional relationships. The monthly visits from wildlife researchers who had learned about their unique situation provided Sarah with mentorship opportunities, and Jack with confirmation that their lifestyle represented more than personal preference. It demonstrated possibilities for human-wildlife coexistence that could serve as a model for conservation efforts in other wilderness areas. But for Sarah, Jack, and Luna, the scientific implications were secondary to the simple reality that they had created a home where wild and domestic coexisted in harmony, where courage had proven stronger than greed, and where a 7-year-old girl's love for an injured bobcat kitten had grown into a bond that would last throughout their lives and serve as proof that the most important families were those built on trust, protection, and the willingness to risk everything for those we love. If you enjoy the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.